if you guys want to check this out, I'm going to go ahead and kind of go up to the next stage. So this is my color palette. And again, it's a real limited color palette. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to kind of block this in with color now. And what I'm going to do is create kind of a darker color. So I'm going to use blue and kind of mix some red in with that. And I'm even going to mix a little bit of yellow. And what I'm doing here is just mixing kind of a darker neutral color. Probably going to be a little bit more cool than anything. And then I'm going to mix just a little bit of water in with this as well. And then what I'm going to do is go ahead and just kind of block this in now with paint. Okay. Again, going to come with a little bit of water, and all I'm doing is basically kind of going over my charcoal lines at this point, and just basically adding contour to, again, kind of block it in. This again can be really loose. Notice that my block in is pretty thick, like my lines are pretty thick. Those will eventually kind of disappear when we get back in there though. Now as I kind of block this in, I'm going to actually go ahead and even lay in my shadows as well. I'm going to come in and go ahead and lay in these shadows a little bit, kind of the contour of those. Something like that. So just blocking things in. One thing I want to talk to you about is when I paint, I like to think of painting as being kind of real similar to working with clay. So like if you're in a ceramics class and say Mrs. Rainberg gave you like a 5-pound ball of clay and she wanted you to make a really detailed, vase out of it that was like 12 inches tall, like there's no way you would take that 5-pound ball of clay and start getting really detailed at first. Instead you would take that clay and very slowly start off very rough, and you would, you'd model it until you got it built up. And then the last thing you would do is you would come back in and you would get detailed. And so painting is very similar. I think sometimes when people want to have a really detailed painting, they think, oh, if it's really detailed, I need to get really detailed from the get-go. But really you can start off just like clay. You can start off real loose, kind of model it, and then kind of get more detailed at the end. Some artists will even use a thicker brush, like a really fat brush at first, and then start working their way into the smaller brushes to kind of, get more detailed at the end. Okay, if you look up here at the monitor, I want to show you a couple things. So this is, a photograph of a still life. In a perfect world, I would give everybody their own fruit. We would have a really nice light source in the room, and we would all be working from observation, direct observation. What I did was just went and purchased some fruit, set up a good light source, and got started. But if you look at this photograph of the fruit, you can tell that the light's coming in from the left, kind of based on the shadows. So what that's doing as well is it's creating darker areas on the right side of the fruit. You can kind of see those areas. So if I turn this into a black and white image, and then I turn it into a 2-value image, you can see the shadows really good, right? And then if I go 2 values, 3 values, 4 values, 5, at about 5 or 6, it starts to make a lot of sense as far as just where the lighter areas are, where the darker areas are. And so as we progress on this, I want you to kind of be thinking about like that image and this image, even when I'm showing it to you in color, if that makes sense. So as you progress, those get, very realistic. But look at all those variations of value. You can still see these hot spots where it's really dark, okay? So what we're gonna do next, I'm gonna kind of pull back those layers to like this. That's what I want you to see when you're looking at this or looking at that, okay? So what we're gonna do is, the next thing we're gonna do is block in those darker shapes. we're just gonna kind of block those in, and that's what I'm thinking. And as I do this, I'm gonna come in and I'm gonna use kind of that darker color again. Kind of mixing that up. I might have to mix in a little bit more to pull it off. And then what I'm gonna do is kind of, I squint my eye a lot too. That helps me a ton just to make my eyes kind of fuzzy. And then I'm just gonna kind of start blocking that in, okay? We're doing, fruit. We're doing pears as we do this. But again, this could be a portrait of somebody. Could really be any kind of object. You can approach it all that in the same way. When I showed you Caitlin Winter's work, again, she's doing this all with portraits. I personally love portraiture, love working with a figure. I think sometimes looking at a fruit still life is a little bit less overwhelming though at first. Again, as I do this, I'm just kind of squinting my eyes, trying to see those darker shapes on the fruit.
I use the water again, right?
Yeah, you can thin this down if you want. I'm going to go ahead and now I'm going to block in my shadows at this point. Just going to kind of drop in a darker, cooler color in there. Yeah, if you thin that down a little bit, it gets real thin and push it around a lot easier. When you're painting, you can use a matte medium too, which kind of simplifies or thins your paint down as well. So that's kind of my stage for just blocking in my dark areas. All right, talk to you a little bit about the next stage. So we've blocked it in. We framed it, we kind of blocked it in with the darker shadows. Now the next step is going to be to paint. We're going to kind of block in the mid-tones of the pears on the left and the right. So like what color would this be if you had to describe like the local color? We did that color mixing game. We talked about what's the local color, what's the intensity, what's the value. So how would you describe that as a color? So I said yellow, yeah, maybe. Yellow, green, yellow, brown, yeah. So let's do this. What I'm gonna do to create that color is I'm gonna start off with yellow. I'm gonna come in and mix that. Think about that color mixing game. I hopefully that made you feel pretty confident with just mixing and how to lower the intensity. And again, you guys are already light years ahead of me. When I was your age, I had no clue on color and how to lower intensity. But if I start off with yellow, I'm gonna mix just a little bit of blue into it to make kind of a greenish yellow. And that color there is maybe similar to that, except the intensity is way wrong. So how do I change the intensity of that to make it closer to that? You said kind of a brownish yellow green. So red, yeah. I've got to work on the opposite side of the color wheel. So if I use a little bit of red in with this, I might have overdid it there. But yeah, you can see where that really changes it. Might come in with just a little bit of blue. Now I'm going to bring in a little bit more yellow. And still that turned it a little bit more green, so I'm going to add a little bit more red. But real quickly I can kind of pull that color in that kind of matches that. So once I've done that, then I'm going to go ahead and transition over and start to kind of block in the color of these pears on the left and the right, okay? I feel like I'm way too green, so I'm gonna pull in a little bit more yellow and red. Kind of mix that in. Okay, and then once I have that, I'm gonna go ahead and come in, and at this point, I'm actually eating into my frame where my line's not as thick anymore, if that makes sense. And again, I'm just kind of dropping in the mid-tone color of this, and I'm not using white yet as I do this. Kind of doing that, and notice that I can even paint right over the top of my darker block ends that I did earlier. And now if I want to come back into this darker color and actually mix some of this original darker color into here, I can start to shift these two colors together a little bit. I don't necessarily have to have perfectly blended edges. Like, it's okay to definitely have some looser brush strokes in there too as you go. Okay. And kind of squint my eye at that. And come back in and grab some of this color. Kind of do the same thing. Come in and frame this in a little bit, using that mid-tone. Like I said earlier, I'm taking my paint up to the edge of my initial block in, and kind of letting that be a little bit. This color is really translucent, meaning that you can see through it pretty easy. So now if I come in with this darker color that I mixed earlier and mix it in with it, I can soften those edges a little bit. And I always catch myself squinting my eye to use that kind of technique as I do it. I haven't used any white yet, kind of saving that white for the end when I want to try to staircase out of my values. White in a painting is like magic when you start pulling that in at the very end. You start to see it really make things pop. Okay, so that's kind of my initial block in, just on the darker mid-tone. On my left and right pair there. All right, so that's kind of where we ended class today on the class that I shot this demo in. And so what we'll do next time is we'll start looking for that local color within that middle pair, and then just continue to kind of build up those layers. But on an acrylic painting like this, I mean, you can easily have 10, 15 layers of paint, and you can just slowly start to build up those layers, glaze, and kind of pick and choose. So looking forward to seeing these develop, and then we'll roll out next week's instruction to kind of wrap up the end of this.